Well, here we are in downtown Los Angeles. This is the beautiful skyscrapers of the downtown area. I'm Neil Young, this is Michael Patterson, and this is our 8th Partycrashers.
8th,
or is it the 9th?
Something.
Let's call it the 8th. It's the first one we've done outside Europe, is that right? And we are in California attending the American Documentary Film Festival, which is held in Palm Springs and finished last week. Since when we have been in Los Angeles. It's your first time in California, first time in Los Angeles.
It is indeed.
Before we move on to talk about the festival, obviously it's a city that you've seen and known through cinema for 20 plus years. How has it been to actually be in this very cinematic environment?
Strange. Firstly, because I haven't been in any kind of familiar landscape. Not every day at least, because we had a walk in Vernon, which is familiar not to film lovers but to viewers and fans of True Detective Season 2, in which Vernon is renamed Vinci, and it's a population of I think 112 now. Probably the smallest city I've ever been in. If we can call it a city, the Americans do.
It is officially a city, one of 88 cities, I think, that comprises Los Angeles itself.
And we've also, to counteract the overwhelmingly industrial landscape of Vernon, yesterday we walked, I would like to say we walked the full length of Wilshire Boulevard, but we got about 9/10 of the way there, and saw that it bended and weaved and went beyond a horizon that we couldn't see, and we didn't know how far Wilshire Boulevard actually was, and the original destination which we stuck with was Santa Monica Pier, so we took a southward turn onto Sepulveda and then onto Santa Monica Boulevard, the upshot of which we did walk the full length of a hike from downtown LA to Santa Monica, which I don't think many people will do during a 6-day stay in Los Angeles.
And if you're going to do it, the obvious way is to just stay on Wilshire all the way, but we of course came up with accidentally a different plan. But
we ended up walking further than we would have had we stuck on Wilshire.
Yes, and the main thing was we got to the sea and all that, and we could see Malibu, and on the way we did see what used to be the restaurant, I think it was called Kate Mantelini's on Wilshire Boulevard in Beverly Hills, which was the famous scene of Al Pacino and Robert De Niro in Heat.
And when you peek in, as we did, like, something beyond tourists, I guess, because you had to clamber over certain fences to get into it. When you peek in, there's obviously no table chairs there anymore, but there is a kind of painting mural at the end of at one end of the restaurant, in which Pacino and De Niro can be seen having a chat. In addition to which, we also have 2 impressive murals to do with boxing. I don't know if they're there in Heat.
It would make sense for Michael Mann to have them in the background of this confrontation between 2 heavyweights, and obviously De Niro had been in a boxing film in his time. But I know Heat has been one of our sort of main touch points, and we were like, what is the location here? We found where the bank robbery was held, which is just around the corner here in downtown, in the business district. And maybe this kind of brings us on to a little bit about the film festival, because Michael Mann's very interested in architecture, and one of the strands of the American Documentary Film Festival, or one of the preoccupations, we could put it like that, just to say the American Documentary Film Festival doesn't just show American documentaries, it shows
and it's otherwise known, or better known as ARM-Docs, by which we'll hitherto referred to it.
But several of the films that we saw do deal very directly with architecture, and Palm Springs itself, which is a city about 2 hours drive away, 1.5 hours drive, 2 hours drive away from Los Angeles, wouldn't necessarily be known for architecture, but basically have a lot of very wealthy people who can afford to commission architects, and we did go to an event at a very kind of fancy 1950s modernist house, and certainly in terms of architecture and modernism, Los Angeles and California and Palm Springs and places like that have a disproportionate impact. So it was very interesting for me to watch films about different architectural things, some of them about American architecture, some of them about Russian or Czech architecture, and then step out into Palm Springs where you have this fantastical landscape, desert and mountains and a very artificial man-made environment.
It does very, very strange things to one's perception of distance and geography to be in such a location. Hailing from northeast England, which has its own beautiful landscapes, but nothing quite as effortlessly vast as California. So that's the first thing that struck me, being firstly in Los Angeles for a few nights, and then into Palm Springs, where the city is built outwards rather than upwards. It's a very sprawling grid, surrounded by mountains, desert landscape, and roads and roads and roads stretch. I mean, to Americans this is very, very familiar, but for me it was very new. And to look along one road and see, the mountains at the end of it, almost like a brilliant backdrop. I thought, well, if you walk half an hour to an hour that way, you're going to be at the foot of the hills, which of course isn't the case. You're having to walk, 4 hours at least, I think, to get anywhere near the foot of the hills. So that changes your perception of distance and proximity and whatnot. Apologies for the overhead accompaniment here. That's the first thing that I got, and then the second is that one morning I walked from the Riviera Hotel where we were being accommodated very kindly by the festival to the Camelot Theatres, which is about an hour's walk, and it's basically an L-shaped route that you take. One direction that way, and then basically a right angle turn, and you walk in the other direction. And I was walking on one road for longer than I would on like a meandering route to work back home, right? So it's just absurd.
Of course, to Americans, even the idea of walking 10 blocks would be seen as something rather freakishly fantastical. And we did manage to walk 103 blocks, I think, of Wilshire yesterday.
Yes.
Before turning off.
It's we got as far as the Federal Building,
which I thought was the end of Wilshire, but what do I know about California?
that's you told. No,
but there was one particular film which dealt with modernist architecture, which is called Architectones,
by Xavier Veilan.
Yeah. The title isn't. Yeah.
The film isn't by Xavier.
The title of the film is Architectones by Xavier Veilan, and the director is François Combin. This was a world premiere at the festival, and this covers 7 modernist houses from California to Europe, as it says here. It starts off with the Melnikov house in Moscow, and it's a bit hard to explain exactly what Xavier Veilan does, but he sort of interacts with buildings in a playful and adventurous way. Like, for instance, one which is a very square house with big windows in California, he fills it with like dry ice kind of stuff, which gives it this sort of strange translucent effect, and people stand back and look at it, and it's sort of lit in an interesting way. It's
kind of like domestic installation, I would say, rather than public installation, as distinct from land art and whatever else. Domestic installation because he's reappropriating spaces which have otherwise been domestic, built as such, that have since not perhaps fallen into disrepair, but they have, evolved in certain ways, and are all of them out of commission, so to speak, as domestic spaces? Or?
Well, the Melnikov house at the beginning was like an experimental socialistic or communistic housing project built as one person's house by the architect.
Which is still inhabited by a single person.
By his family. And his way of interacting with this is to build a kind of brazier in the garden, which kind of mimics the shape, and then he puts fire in it. And it's a kind of sort of playful, low-key approach to architecture, and in a way it kind of emphasises the kind of cosy domesticity of architectural spaces. And I thought it was quite a absorbing and intriguing little film. And what was especially interesting was that he's got the whole world to play with, because he appears to be a wealthy French artist who has lots of backing. And yet 3 of the houses that he chooses were in California. Which again, a lot of people might not in Europe associate California. People who know about architecture would know, like Nietzsche and Lautner and people like this, and these very important architects. But I think the film will play at lots of festivals. Architecture films seem to be a bit of a vogue at the minute, and there are such things as architecture film festivals.
And this is a appropriately, suitably low-key approach to its subject matter. It's only 52 minutes?
Well, 69 it's credited as, but it could easily be 2 hours, because you've got to cram 7 dwellings into this.
And it's got music by the guy from Air.
Godin. whatever his name, Godin, and and again, it's interweaving of different disciplines and different approaches and responses to art. One artist's response to another, which can often be sort of a good way of looking at both of them because they reveal their true colours. But I know you're particularly interested in architecture films. Can cinema? Well, Patrick Keeler, who's one of yours and my favourite filmmakers, is an architect first and foremost. Cinema and architecture, are they good bedfellows? Are they good dancing partners, or are they essentially two different beasts?
I think there's no reason why they can't be. My frustration comes from whenever I begin to delve into academic assessments of the intersection of architecture and film. It always just becomes a little bit dry. And as a critic who writes outside of academia, I tend to, obviously I write what I like, and what interests me, but I always feel like, as somebody who hasn't trained in architecture and kind of only scratching a surface, and also being a little superficial in my assessment of urban landscape, but the flip side to that seems to be too much the other way, and I'd like to see a greater synthesis between, serious discussion of architecture and representations of it in film that also doesn't neglect film form, which
brings us back to Michael Mann in a way, because I think a lot of his best films show an engagement with specifically urban landscape. I mean, I can't imagine what a Michael Mann pastoral film would be like.
The interesting thing about heat is that, and this seems especially the case now I've visited Los Angeles, it doesn't really linger on the city. It's quite anonymous, actually, in the way that man distributes these pockets of urban space. I mean, if you look at a map of all of the heat locations, it's almost as if he chose them to make a sightseeing tour, at least a day-long sightseeing tour, very, very difficult. And, to get anywhere in Los Angeles with any sort of speed, you're spending most of your time on freeways and expressways and whatnot, and you don't really feel like you're in a city. You feel like you're on those arterial inter zones rather than a city in itself.
Do you think it's actually even physically possible to do all of the 85 or 100 locations even in a day, even if you have a car? I would say
it doesn't seem to be.
I think you'd have 2 minutes in each.
Or maybe a helicopter ride like Pacino.
Yeah, which he does through the middle of this. But yeah, as I say, I think I know what you mean. It's it is a backdrop for Mann, but it's he could do it anywhere. He could make the film in Denver, Colorado, whenever he wants to do it. But the fact that it is Los Angeles, and the fact that you do have basically a country-sized area to play with, and if the whole film is about cat and mouse between criminals and cops who are trying to track down different things and keep out of each other's way to a certain degree. And there's the famous scene where they're in the car park, the cops, and De Niro sort of smokes and looks through the glasses.
And it does very interesting things with height as well, because height is this kind of it evokes power and ability, because that scene that you mentioned where they're at the port, I think, and De Niro's above. Is this guy something, or is this guy something? and then the scene where Pacino catches up, where MUBI's New Dawn Fades plays, and he's going through the motorway very, very fast, actually fast motion, but he's actually being assisted by a helicopter who's telling him where De Niro is, and that's the only way he can kind of catch up. Cheating. And then you come to Los Angeles and you think, come on, he's never going to catch up with him.
Well, there's the famous essay by Tom Anderson, who did Los Angeles Plays Itself, about Collateral, in which he says, any taxi driver that goes from 3rd and Broadway to whatever it is, and sort of deconstructs it. And Tom, I think, is from Los Angeles, and Michael Mann, who's a very interested Chicagoan. But to come back to the Palm Springs Festival and to talk about moving away from the urban architecture to rural architecture, the film Sleepless and a Paysan by Francesco Don Giovanni. This in some ways is the kind of the exact diametric opposite of Heat, because it's about one building. There are very few people in it, if any at all. It's taken from a text written in the 1780s by, I think, a Swiss naturalist of some description, who finds this kind of castle chateau sort of place in
called
rural...
Casino del Luca, Casino of the Duke, located in San Basilio, was for more than 2,000 years the centre of life for the entire region.
And this is in Apulia, in the south of Italy. And a director I didn't know anything about. It reminded me a little bit of Pietro Marcello's Lost and Beautiful, which I know is a film that you haven't seen, which is a film that kind of plays with documentary and fiction. I think it's primarily fictional. It started off as a documentary about this particular building, and the man who was looking after it, he then dies, and then it kind of forces the director to go in sort of fictional alleyways, let's put it like that.
Sure.
But for you, Sleepless, I know that you were particularly impressed by it because it's a very kind of, it's not exactly a radical film or a new kind of making a film, but it's a kind of worthwhile building, and it's a chance to linger in these kind of mossy,
it very much
dilapidated
lingers.
spaces.
I mean, how long is it? It's 40 minutes. It was the international premiere at Palm Springs Docks Film Festival. I really liked it. You don't really get a sense until the very end of the film, like how sprawling this space is. I actually thought it was visiting several different places within a broader geography. I didn't realise it was one site, and I liked its contemplative feel and the way that it reproduced the Duke's writings, or the guy who designed it.
No, it's The Visitor.
The Visitor.
It's The Visitor.
From that time, and it spends time in this space, and as you said, it's not like a radically structured film. In fact, I thought it was in some places a little bit too arbitrary for its own good, although to a certain point I can indulge those kinds of meandering structures and focuses. You didn't like it?
Oh no,
Okay,
I think it's a worthwhile film. As I say, to me, having seen Lost and Beautiful, which is it's a very kind of emotional experience. It's about animals, it's about the landscape of Italy, and it's much more of a road film. But this could be easily shown as a sort of double bill with that film. It would be a wonderful.
Well, I was actually reminded of Robinson and Ruins, which is one of my top 10 films ever made by the aforementioned Patrick Keeler, in which an unseen narrator visits sites of dilapidation in and around Oxfordshire. Now, this is a very, very different landscape to Oxfordshire, but it has a similar tone. It's not as witty because it's verbatim quoting the original text. It's not intervening upon the space, I don't think, as much to the extent that Keeler does. But for me, its chief drawback for me was its length. It could be at least, and should be perhaps at least, like 80 minutes. I mean, these kinds of durations that I come up with there are arbitrary, of course, but I want it to be seen and programmed by other film festivals. And a 40-minute film is very difficult to program, as we know, and curate, because where do you put it? How do you curate it?
It was shown in a shorts program which
included Anna
Square by Jelena Novakovic, Champ des Possibles by Christina Picci, and actually the film that I liked the most in the festival, which is in a way an architecture film, which is called The Lights by Juan Renau and Manuel Abramovich, an Argentinian film, which is a black and white 7 minutes study of a house full of Christmas lights, and one gets the impression that in this town, wherever it is in Argentina, decorating houses with Christmas lights is to some degree a competitive thing, and you never quite find out. You never really told.
Well, you're never really told that it's a house.
Yeah, or some kind of.
It's another domestic space that isn't quite a domestic space.
Yeah, and a film that leaves a lot of questions unanswered, which I quite liked. The director Abramovich had previously done a film called The Queen, La Reina, which is about a child beauty pageant in Argentina, which I like very much. And this one, as I say, it's a kind of a miniature, self-contained, does what it wants to do. It's visually very striking. Black and white is a very interesting way of presenting very colourful Christmas lights, because part of the point of them is that they're kind of garish and a bit gaudy. And to put them all in this kind of limpid, beautiful, crystalline monochrome runs the risk of being a little bit sort of not pretentious exactly, but distancing, shall we put it like that. And it's not exactly engaging with the people in their spaces.
It's certainly not trying to be. What's that terrible TV film that they made in America and the UK? The Lights, is it? With Robson Green was in the UK one, in which two neighbours are competing with one another to see who has the most extravagant Christmas. Christmas
So it actually has the same title as this Argentinian.
No, it's not called like anyway.
Okay, and then a director that I know that you like very much, Christina Picci.
Yeah.
Champ des Possibles, which is about, I think it's about at least 2 cities in Quebec.
Yeah.
You have Quebec City and Montreal.
It premiered, I think, in Venice, although I don't like to. It did?
I will bow to your knowledge
Okay.
of Christina Picci. She previously did the film Zima.
Yeah, she did Zima previously, which was a short documentary about Siberian winters and the landscape and how locals there survive the harsh winters. And that was made under the auspices of Cine Train, which was a collective of filmmakers who utilise railway.
The railways of Russia.
The railway network of Russia.
Yeah.
As a starting point, and they put different teams together, send them off into the vast landscape of Russia, and they have to make a film. And this was Zima was great. It was 2013. It did it screened pretty much everywhere on the festival circuit. This one, I see no reason why it can't have a similar sort of longevity.
I mean, it's much kind of. This one is much more sort of loose, discursive, impressionistic. Voices are heard. You get glimpses of a city.
Yeah, I mean, one of the early sequences is of a journey under a bridge. As a new arrival into these cities may look up as they're being driven into the city, and various dissolves are used to prolong the bridge into a dreamlike texture. And as you said, different voices are overheard.
Sort of snatches of different dialogues,
snippets,
sometimes speaking French, sometimes speaking English, sometimes speaking other languages.
Yeah,
and
for me, as a city symphony, it's it's great.
It creates a kind of reverie, but in a very kind of concrete way, because cities are concrete. They are places where people live, they are places where people work. There's something very emphatic about cities in a way that The Sleepless, the Italian film about the rural architecture. You can take time to ruminate. If you walk down the street in downtown, you take time to ruminate, you'll probably be knocked over by somebody with a shopping trolley.
For change.
Yeah. So, but it does force you to think about cities in a different. Think about your landscape.
And it's also a plural space. It's a space of pluralities.
Yeah. Well, the title is the field of the possible. I think Champ des Possibles, which is presumably what Christina Picci would say that cinema itself is the field where possibilities can be explored. And particularly if you're making a 14-minute experimental short film, basically anything goes. If you are making narrative films which have to be commercially viable, clearly you're operating within different strictures. And so, I mean, it's like somebody said about free verse. It's like tennis with the net down. What's the point? Some people would say that you need some kind of external restraining consideration for your creativity to grow.
But I think the way Picci frames urban landscapes, I'm very much on board with it. I like it. It speaks to my sensibilities, and I could watch her films, on loop again and again and again. And Zima, I wrote about several times. I've watched it many, many times. This one I've only had the pleasure of viewing once, or actually 1.5 times, because we had a glitch in the cinema projection.
Well, these things happen at the very best festivals.
They definitely do.
I'm trying to find about this film called Super Unit. Remember that one?
It's on the other page. This is Super Unit, the Polish film by Teresa Szepiec.
Yeah, this was the one that was shown with architectones.
Yes, and this is an internal architecture. We don't get to see until the final shot what it is, the apartment block that we're seeing. It's an apartment block in Poland, and it's 762 flat apartment doors and 762 stories. Obviously we don't get to meet all inhabitants of this apartment block, but it's a massive building that the film very deliberately captures in a disorienting light.
A lot of some sort of distorted lens,
and also a lot of elegant, steady, calm tracks through this. Or movements rather through the very narrow corridors. We get to see somebody on their daily jog, but they're not actually leaving the building to jog. They're just jogging along these
endless
passageways
corridors.
and endless corridors. And it's like, you could imagine Alan Clark filming one of his stories there, because you get a great sense of, again, height and mobility and what that might or may not mean in certain different contexts.
And watching the film in Palm Springs, which is a very, very affluent city, where everybody has a beautiful detached house, probably with a swimming pool. I don't think there's a great deal of public housing in Palm Springs. And this is a film about a socialist stroke communistic housing project that was built, I think, in the 60s. And this idea that the future of socialist man or man's future development would be in such huge environments, such huge spaces. And then you come out of that cinema in Palm Springs, and it's very hard to imagine a more different landscape. And the idea of having, like, a housing unit where you have communal everything and
people living on top of one another.
Yeah. I mean, I would imagine to a Palm Springs person that'd be like watching a documentary about life on planet.
What is this sci-fi documentary we're watching?
What is going on in Europe? But and of course, a lot of European people did kind of leave that kind of Europe to come to the States.
Sure.
Sometimes to get away from it, sometimes to build stuff here. And if you go around Los Angeles, there is a lot of public housing relative to Palm Springs. And again, what's interesting to me about Los Angeles, it's all right. On the one hand, it's Beverly Hills, Rodeo Drive. You have ridiculous wealth, but you also have a lot of social housing, a lot of social conscience, a lot of union movements, a lot of labour movements, especially in kind of Spanish-speaking places. A great sense of community and people together on the streets.
Well, it's a city founded on displacement, violent displacement, and top-down class war. So wherever you have anything like that, you're also going to get its counter-image, I guess. And so this is where the rich heritage of labour movements and other such forms of organisation come into play, I think. But Palm Springs was something else, though. I mean, to be there, and the festival is obviously very well put together, organised. Like 2/3 of the programme I hadn't even heard of before, and this is no bad thing. It's a very, very rare and unusual thing these days in the documentary landscape.
They definitely cast the net wide. I mean, for instance, one of my favourite films of last year or 2 years ago, which was Veruda, a film about Boyan by Igor Bezinovic from Croatia, with North American premiere. And I don't know if that film was submitted to bigger festivals, but the fact that it had its North American premiere at Amdocs is to me surprising, because it's a film. I think it's an exceptional film, and I'm just surprised that these festivals are on the lookout for good talent. I mean, if anybody wants to discover a new director from Europe, I think Igor Bezinovic, who has mainly done shorts, sometimes very short shorts, 1 or 2 or 3 minutes. A lot of humour in all of his films.
Well, he's a young, highly intelligent, reflective filmmaker who knows what he's doing. And it's no stretch to imagine that there's going to be some kind of retrospective of his work, of which there's already, his output isn't slim already.
He's done one longer film, which is called Blockade, which is about a student protest in Zagreb.
But it's no stretch to imagine, the Lincoln Center in New York putting on some sort of retrospective in the next 5 years, and then all of a sudden it'll be like, oh well, who is this Igor Bezinovic? And you'll get the usual articles being written in the usual platforms and outlets who I don't need to name. But Amdocs. Here it was, the North American premiere of Veruda, which is a great film. And also,
getting back to the architecture idea, Veruda is a working class area of Pula, which is a kind of very, it's an old Roman city in Croatia with a beautiful circular theatre, amphitheatre sort of thing, lots of very intact ruins. And Veruda is a place of public housing and tower blocks and all this kind of thing. And it's about this kid called Boyan, who is 24, and he is very much a product of his environment, and he's very proud to be from Veruda, and he is often photographed and shot in front of like murals which are proclaiming Veruda. And I've been to coastal Croatia, Split and places like this, and it's a very kind of clannish football hooligans a little bit, people get very attached to their specific neighborhoods, and then that manifests itself sometimes in friction between those neighborhoods. And Los Angeles has that on a rather grand scale with gang wars. And as I say, the film is in 34 minutes. It kind of deals with his kind of criminal background, his attempts to go straight, his family. He's a very engaging... His love interest. He's a very engaging character, and the film is a very sort of sensitive and humorous engagement with Boyan, who very, very sadly died in horrible, tragic circumstances while in prison some months after the filming. But again, to watch a film about a Croatian hoodlum in his tower block environment, and then you come out into the middle of the desert in Palm Springs, and I think that's one of the nice things about festivals, is that they can bring together wild disparities, bizarre disparities, and put films together and make you not only rethink cinema but also the environment that you're in. And if you actually look beneath the surface of Palm Springs, there is poverty. There are homeless people. You know, there's a park where very close to the theatre, Sunrise Park. And there's somebody who was saying to me, you know, it's a thing that the new mayor of Palm Springs, somebody said to him, what about the homeless? He was like, what about them? You know, and it's like, there is a social conscience in places like Palm Springs. And in a way there has to be, because I don't see organised national government or local government or regional government dealing with that. And we can say this, you know, from a European perspective, where everything, of course, is wonderful and paradise. But it's certainly, the American thing is self-reliance, private enterprise, you shouldn't rely on handouts. Welfare is this horrible thing that, you know, you are stigmatized if you take any money from the state. And what I like about downtown, which is my favorite part of Los Angeles, is that it's kind of, you see everything together. And if you go to Beverly Hills or if you go to Santa Monica, it's very, very hard to see the whole social picture. But here you have, you know, fantastic wealth, fantastic tower blocks.
It's aggressively, not perhaps antagonistic, but it's an aggressively contested space. Or, you know, all urban space is contestable, as we know, but and it's contested, of course, as we know. But I've never seen a place so visually and visibly contested. You know, and I mean, I don't mean contested in the sense that, you know, we have homeless organisations, right? But I mean this coming together of, you know, unthinkable wealth and the, you know, concentration of that. You know, a few blocks literally from Skid Row, you know.
And of course, a lot of this is written about in Mike Davis's City of Quartz, which is a book that I read it years and years ago. I think you just read it for the first time. And this is a book which has like stuff about Vernon and downtown Skid Row, Fontana, which we didn't get to, Lana Del Rio. And it's, you know, probably one of the best books written about Los Angeles. And,
in 1990.
And maybe if we wrap up with a recommendation that if you want to know more about Los Angeles and more about California and how this city is this maddening but completely irresistible and fascinating space, you could do a lot worse than pick up Mike Davis's City of Quartz, available from all good bookshops. Anything else to add in your final moments?
We're one block from, for those of you in Los Angeles, we're one block from the last bookshop here, and they have one copy left, and it's about, I think, $8, something like that, because I was just there an hour ago. So I would very much recommend that. Closing comments. You know, you asked me a couple of days ago where Los Angeles ranks in my, you know, rigidly held hierarchies of great cities.
I think coming here you had Warsaw and Zagreb.
Warsaw, Zagreb and Lisbon would be up there. I also love Marseille because, as I describe it, it's encouragingly rough, which I like. And then coming to Los Angeles, it's strange because those other cities I've just listed have the privilege of having been visited by me multiple times, and it's that sense of familiarity of revisiting a place in that, you know, that mangled impression of a city that you always take away from it, then being remapped and rejigged into gear when you land and, you know, when you're being driven into the city, by my chauffeur who also travels with I don't know, it's going to be strange to kind of get some sense of perspective and distance on my time here in California, because, you know, I've only ever been to New York and very briefly New Jersey previously, 7 years ago. And this is just like, you know, it's an immensely vast city. I mean, can you even call the city Los Angeles? It's
88
many
cities and more.
In many ways, it's more than that, and it's impossible to get any kind of grasp of it. I mean, I asked our friend Ricky the other day, what's his an LA dwelling local, and what's his favourite Los Angeles film, and he said, well, the thing is that you don't really have Los Angeles films in the authentic sense, because the sense of having this graspable entity that can be condensed into one narrative or visual or artistic framework is just kind of impossible. So you only get like selective, choose your Los Angeles and make a film about it. And in previous Partycrashers we've discussed Travis Wilkerson's Machine Gun Typewriter, which is another great Los Angeles kind of history, if you like.
And we can also bring in James Benning's Loss, which is an experimental portrait of Los Angeles made up of, I think it's 60 shots of different parts of Los Angeles County, including one or two, one of the business district, one in Skid Row. And again, like Heat, I think James Benning is going out of his way to show places that even with all the thousands of films that have been made here, like for instance, some of my favourite Los Angeles films are things like Crank or Memento, which show you really hidden parts of the city, and they're not necessarily beautiful parts of the city. It's very easy to show the beautiful hills of Santa Anita, Pasadena, and the Hollywood Hills and all that kind of thing. We were at Griffith Park.
And it's also very easy to retain your sense of these very, very disparate pockets as separate, in no means interconnected, because to travel between them is to do so by car, on freeways, expressways, and all those other interzones, as I've said. But walking, as we like to do, I mean, we walked 22 miles yesterday to Santa Monica and a little bit back. And you can walk, previously we walked to Vernon, we must have done like 16, 18 miles that day, and to trace that on a map, you've only just started to scratch the surface of how vast the city is. But to walk there is to actually see how these pockets kind of segue into one another. And sometimes it's very distinct and very dramatic. Being driven through Koreatown and Beverly Hills the other night was just like something, pedestrian residential neighbourhoods with no street lamps, because they're not designed to be walked through, and to do so would probably be to encounter some lawn patrol and armed response unit.
But even in Architect Tones, the first thing that Weyland does when he comes to Los Angeles is hires a car. And if you, it's always the first thing that everybody says about Los Angeles. Oh, you have to drive. You can't take public transport. Oh, nobody goes on the metro. Nobody walks. Nobody takes a bus. Which is all complete nonsense.
It's a myth.
Yeah, and I went the first couple of times. This is my 6th time here, and the first 2 times I had a car. And you spend half the time parking, getting stuck in freeways and all that kind of thing. And now the last thing I'd want to do in Los Angeles is to drive. And I'm perfectly happy to take. It's nice to have the time to be able to do that. But the idea of being sitting in some hot box surrounded by bad-tempered people honking their horns is not my idea of a good time. But anyway, my idea of a good time is always to be downtown. So
you'll be coming back to Armed Docs. We haven't mentioned that Armed Docs is only 5 editions old. This was its 5th edition.
This is the 5th edition of Armed Docs, American Documentary Film Festival.
And for me, it's a very young festival. As we've noted in its programming, it's very ambitious in terms of bringing this very wide and wild program to this very strangely dislocated landscape.
And it does have a semi-formal link with the Prizren DocuFest in Kosovo, exchanging programs and different things. And again, from Prizren to Los Angeles, Kosovo to California, how do you make that bridge? Cinema film festivals is one way of trying to make that bridge. And if people from one go to the other, you kind of realise that we're all just one big family.
Yeah.
You realise that it is possible to make those bridges, or to even try to make those bridges, and there are more similarities, there are more differences. And how many Kosovars are there in California? Probably more than there are in Kosovo. But we did a Partycrashers from Prizren. We've done a Partycrashers from California, and where's next?
Vila do Conde.
Vila do Conde in Portugal. So who knows what our backdrop will be for that. So anyway, this has been our, let's say, 8th Partycrashers from downtown Los Angeles. Neil Young and Michael Patterson, thank you for watching.
Cheers.